Musical Talk at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe 2015. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits and not, as was genuinely suggested to me, Ross Thibbits. Someone completely got the wrong end of my name and spoonerised it when I was at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe this year. But that's of small consequence against the wonder that is the greatest cultural and arts festival in the world. Every year we talk about it. Every year I'm delighted to have the privilege to talk to some of the great people behind the shows there. And so many of those shows are musical theatre, or in the wider family of musical theatre, including light opera, cabaret, and one-man or one-woman shows, as long as they've got a song in it. And as usual, the first episode of the Musical Talk coverage of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe is all about those shows you can still see. So every show that I talk about today is currently still on, and I'll be giving you details about how you can see and hear these shows. And in the course of this episode, you'll be able to hear interviews with actors, actresses, musical directors, producers, directors, and other important creative people involved in musical theatre. And you'll also be able to hear a number of songs from a lot of the shows that we're going to be talking about today. And just to give you a taste of what the Edinburgh Festival sounds like, you'll also hear in between the interview extracts and the songs some of the street sounds that I recorded in Edinburgh, just so that you can have a sense of the vibrancy that you get walking around the streets of that fine city at this time of year. Well, we've got a lot to get through. There are so many shows. I do hope that when you hear this episode, you'll be inspired to go along and try the Fringe. Pop up for a weekend, pop up for a week, even pop up for a day. Whatever you fancy. If you get a chance to go there and see just some of these shows, or even just one of these shows, then you will have enjoyed yourself. So, what are you going to get today? Well, as you can imagine, as I went round the Edinburgh Festival Fringe this year, if I liked a show, or it had something that I thought was interesting or good, or a song that was amazing, I try to speak to some of the people behind it. There were also some shows which I adored where that wasn't possible, so I'll be mentioning a few of those as well. And extracts, so these are just small sections of some of those interviews in a medley with songs and a little bit of introduction, so you know where you can go to see them. And of course, in the next few weeks, you'll have a chance to hear the longer, fuller interviews, where we get down to the nitty-gritty of each of the shows in a bit more detail. So today is, if you like, a smorgasbord, a finger buffet, a taster menu. I'll stop now, I've run out of similes that relate to food, but you get the idea. And what better way of starting a show about musical theatre than with a song? So let's start with a song by an old friend of this programme, Sue Casson. She's up again in Edinburgh with her English Cabaret Hour, subtitled this year Brief Encounters, and this is a new song that she's written for it. After that, we'll hear an interview with Ken Alexander, who's the director of Urinetown for the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. And as you'll hear, I spoke to Ken about the moral positioning of the piece and playing with audience sympathies and expectations. But first, that song from Sue Casson and her English Cabaret Hour. It's about a famous person. I'm not going to tell you who, the song will explain that. But here's how she introduces it. When I turned on the BBC coverage of the Chelsea Flower Show earlier this year, I was disappointed to see one hardy annual sadly missing from the presenting team. So I wrote him this song.
I miss you, Alan Titchmarsh, with your cheeky gap-toothed grin and air of affability that masks the wasp within. For a simple toiler of the soil, you brushed up pretty smart and captured every female gardener's heart. Blazer sharp, fingers green, you brightened every gardening scene, almost a border on your own. Shirts fairy pinks, fairy blues, a myriad of rosy hues, but always perfect in their tone. I miss you, Alan Titchmarsh, no common name for you. A land palustrous minor of variegated hue. You were a hardy annual, perennially a pro. Though once our afternoon delight, now we snuggle up in bed at night. Unkindly cut, it wasn't right. Why did they let you go? You were Chelsea gold, undisputed best in show. Early flowers, fruit and veg, all presented with a pleasing edge. Cutting views and how and when to sow. Cause a spade, always decoratively displayed. You're wasted on the radio. Be-be-be-do, I miss you, Alan Titchmarsh, a northern cultivar. You climbed from being no but a lad to the everyman you are. I miss your jokey blokiness, and how's your garden grow? You truly were a bloom so rare, with that surprising boyish hair. You stalked the green with theatrical flair. Why did they let you go? You were Chelsea gold, undisputed best. You were Chelsea gold, never silver gilt. You were Chelsea gold, undisputed best in show.
Did you find that you were re-pitching it? Did at any stage the pitch change, go up or down?
Absolutely, yeah. Because I think the important thing is that for us, we wanted to find out what the truth of the story was. Start from a very real position of telling the story of these people and the very real things, what it means to actually be told, no, you can't pee unless you can afford to pee, and what that means, how that affects your health, how it affects your state of mind. And there's a line in it, what with all the nitrates making you crazy and all that.
Yes,
there's a lot of different things in there. And you have to find what that reality for the characters is in order to, and obviously for the rich characters in the play, they're skimming off the profits, but at the same time, the guy who's leading all that knows in his heart of hearts that this is the right thing to do. The fact that he's making a fast buck out of it doesn't, as I'm neither up nor down to him. He thinks he's doing the right thing, and in fact he is, because he's controlling the limited water supply. So we had to find what the truth for both sides of the story was. That was our starting point, and then we had to grow it and magnify it and amplify it to find the style of the show.
And it's interesting as an audience how you are sort of moved in different directions, because obviously it starts off with the status quo, which is deemed or it's sold to you as a bad thing.
Yes.
And then you get the revolution, which is ultimately successful, although simplistic. And then, as you say, at the very end, the outcome of what that means, essentially the death of all the people in this town and by extension, perhaps further into the world.
Yeah.
As we're told, this drought's just getting worse and worse and spreading. But, the speech marks the socialist revolution. And the first half, it's played very firmly capitalism versus a gentle socialism.
That's right.
Yeah. Not Marxism, but, a gentle, the people and that's all lovely, but it's platitudinous, isn't it?
And I think very much, the show is geared that the audience take the side of the poor, and that the other side is painted as pure evil. And then it becomes a bit more ambiguous and more conflicted as the story proceeds.
Well, at the end of Act 1, you actually outline that quite firmly as well in your costume design, because when you've got the good on one side of the stage and the bad on, I'm using speech marks here,
yes.
Because they're in their outer gear, the chap who owns the company was wearing a blue suit, he's wearing a black coat, and you're with the policeman, and they've got black jackets on, and there's a black apron on.
There's a lot of colour coding for shorthand there.
It is, exactly, but it looked really good, because you had you had the black on one side, and everyone else was beige, actually.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
And in fact, our lighting designer has emphasised that further by giving a clean, cool light to the evil side, and this kind of muddy, dirty light to the other side. So.
Well, it also sums up the politics in a strange way, doesn't it? Because it's marvellous. But once again, you've just touched on something I thought was very interesting. And it's the way of steering an audience through it from your point of view as a director. If a show is sufficiently pastiche, and this show is, because we do have these characters who come out from the drama every now and then and narrate, the policeman and little Sally, who's she's representative of the poor group, shall we say, and they come out and meet in this sort of neutral zone whilst
outside the show,
explaining to the public what's going on, the audience what's going on. So they are the meta part, and they're deconstructing as they go. And well, this is a musical.
That's right. There's a touch of Brecht in there and Kurt Weill as well.
It is Brechtian dissonance. Yes. Beautiful. What I find interesting, though, for you, as I say, is how, if you're playing that up, if the thing is so pastiche and sending itself up and dislocating itself from a speech marks reality, how do you get the reality, which you also need to run in parallel? It has to have some core of truth.
Absolutely,
and
that's right.
How do you get an audience genuine to feel any kind of affection and sympathy for the central characters?
Yes, and in fact that's one of the real challenges of the show, because I think if it was all about just pastiche, it would be a sketch show.
Yes.
And this is the thing that we've had to work hardest with in the show, and why we want to start out from the truth of the characters, because if they're playing honestly, as long as that grain of honest truth is at the heart of the character, then I think it's possible to emotionally travel the journey with them. But I don't think you should necessarily. I think you should feel conflicted when you come out of the show, because they state right from the beginning, this is not a happy musical, although it's very funny.
It's bouncy, though.
Yeah.
It bounces all the way to the end.
Yes, that's right. And it won't send you out with a warm glow in terms of whatever the characters end up, but hopefully it will send you out with a sense of enjoyment about how you've got to that point.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, you heard a song from Sue Casson, and if you want to go and see more of her, go to the English Cabaret Hour, subtitled Brief Encounters. That's on at the C venue, South, which is in Lutton Place, just off Nicholson Street, and that's there until the 31st of August, and the shows are at 5:15. And then you heard Ken Alexander, the director of Urinetown. And you can go and see that at the Assembly Hall, which is the grand building on the Mound. And that's every day until the 31st of August, excluding the 24th. And it starts at 11:45. And that, unusually for the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, is the complete show. And if you're wondering about the star gradings, which is so much part of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, for better or for worse, I gave the English Cabaret Hour Brief Encounters 4 stars, and I gave Urinetown 5 stars, and called it quirky, sprightly, and well worth seeing. And so it is. Time, I think, for another song. This is from the show Jesus Camp, the comedy musical. So let's hear the introductory song which sets that show up, and then after that a short extract of the interview I conducted with its creatives. That's Dan Peter Reeves, Bethan Francis and Winston Eade. And we'll be talking about how the show came about.
I'm gonna go to heaven, up to the sky and be free. Yes, I'm gonna go to heaven, just Mary and Joseph and Jesus and me.
CNJ Christian Radio. Today we'll be talking about a new brand of Christianity, an evangelical summer camp recruiting kids to an extremist and, quite frankly, scary set of beliefs. Would you expect your child to lay down their life in the name of Christ our Savior? We'll be talking about that and more after this short break. School's out for summer, and there's no time to lose. So many ways to fill your days, but how do you choose? Some kids do swim camp, some kids smoke crack. But if you really want to change the world, pick Jesus Camp. You only get one chance to make a difference. You only have one choice if you want to save your soul. Tell your mom you're ready and your bags are packed, 'cause anyone can come by to Jesus Camp, to Jesus Camp, to Jesus Camp. 0900 hours. Arrived at Sarah Chastity's Christian Camp for Kids, North Dakota.
Dear God, please make this the best summer ever, and help me to show others the true power of your love. Better pack my Bible and a crucifix or two. Jesus needs me to spread his love, so that's what I'm gonna do. These kids will need a direction, Jesus told me in my dreams. Gonna show those kids
exactly what being a child of God really means. 'Cause Jesus has touched me, yes, he touched me deep and true. I'll let every kid who goes to Jesus Camp know that he will touch them too. Yes, he will.
Driving down the highway, flashing our headlamps. All the cool kids are on their way to Jesus Camp. To Jesus Camp.
To Jesus.
To Jesus Camp.
So it's almost by accident that we've sort of written a show that's more suited to an American audience, perhaps. But the English seem to get it too. But it's based on a documentary that you can see on Netflix called Jesus Camp. And it was about a year ago that I watched it, and I said, this is crazy. It's not a comedy documentary at all. I said, this is mad, but it would make a good musical comedy. And I said it to Bethan.
I like your thinking, you'll go far.
I said it to Bethan, and she actually happened to have just watched it herself.
Literally the same day.
Oh, right.
It was bizarre.
And she said, oh, watch that too. And it kind of spiralled from there. The American accents is fluke, maybe.
Yeah. I trained in America, but I think, we've had a few Americans say they thought we sounded American, so we're happy with that.
I'm not American, but I genuinely thought you were an American cast. And then when afterwards you came up and said hello, I thought something's gone wrong here. It does not compute. So you got this idea, you're inspired basically by a documentary, and I suspect a fairly sinister sounding one to
it's
the way you're
very
describing
dark.
it. Yes.
Yeah, very dark.
I mean, and there is this in the musical, isn't there? There is this use of it's an evangelical Christian summer camp for kids.
That's right.
Yeah.
But it does appear to be being used for an ulterior motive, shall we say, which actually, in fairness, you put this lovely level in whereby you have a Christian radio play periodically, and they are opposed to it because they consider it to be damaging reputation. So you've covered your bases very nicely. But there is a great step from I've seen a documentary, let's make a musical, to how do we make a musical?
Yeah.
So what experience did you have? How did you turn your idea into actions?
It's not something we've done before. We've never written a musical before, but it's always something we've wanted to do.
Yeah.
Once again, I like your thinking.
Yeah.
Everything you say is thematically correct.
That's when Winston came on board, because we knew we didn't have the musical know-how to be able to write a full musical.
No.
Bethan has musical
strum a
knowledge, but not enough to follow it through.
No.
So you're the man with a hand in the piano.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the aim really, musically, was to create a catchy, tuneful score, but then keeping the innocence of... It's very much character-driven, a lot of the score is, and the way the music, it sort of takes you on a journey, and then with the musical score, you've got the songs, which, by teaming up with Bethan as well, writing the lyrics, we've managed to really capture the whole emotion of the whole journey of these characters, I think.
Well, I think, funnily enough, that it's interesting to me the way you describe the plot, because the way you describe the plot is absolutely accurate, of course, but there is the other plot, which is it is about two very lonely children in their own way, forming a, sadly, turns out, ephemeral friendship over the course of one summer, as we clearly becomes apparent that they aren't friends 25 years later. But that's actually lovely, and that ability to capture that brittle... Pride isn't the right word, but there's a brittleness to wanting to be accepted and wanting to have a friend, and yet at the same time preserving your... I don't know what the word would be, but, not being hurt.
Yeah, they're protecting themselves.
And that comes across really strongly in there, and that's a beautiful character journey, as you quite rightly say. So you do have the parallel of the context, or you have the character journey within the context of the book that you've written. So, but I hear the three elements. How did the three elements get together? How did you know each other? Then did you write the book and then the songs were added, or was it an integrated affair? Did you all stand around the piano with pots of alcohol, which I believe is traditional?
There was standing around the piano quite a bit.
Yeah.
There was a lot of...
Someone saying, "Where's the key?"
Yeah. There was a lot of brainstorming, and really the whole creative process was...
It was
all
kind of a
together.
mix match, because we were just finding our way. So sometimes I'd write a bit of script, and then I'd be like, I really could do with a song that goes here, and it needs to be a little bit like this.
And take us to this point.
Other times...
So you knew the journey of the song?
Pardon?
You knew the journey of the song individually within the
Yeah.
mountain. Oh, well,
Often
that's
I'd write
really
something,
useful.
I'd know, I want a song to do this
So
and
that I
take
can
us
get
here.
there.
Yeah.
But sometimes Winston would have brainstormed some ideas. He'd go, I've got this great melody that I think might suit this sort of thing. So it was really a back and forth.
Yeah.
It was really sporadic way of writing.
Yeah.
Probably not very time effective.
It was great fun though.
But yeah.
Great fun.
If the sausage comes out of the machine at the end, that's fine. It doesn't matter quite
Yeah.
how the machine works.
It did its
Does
job, yeah.
Yeah, we had to be quite brutal. Like, sometimes we'd find something we really liked, but it just wasn't doing what we wanted, and we just had to say that's not going to happen, right? And that's just how it is.
Mark Twain says you have to kill your babies.
Yeah.
Which, ironically, given the anti-abortion
Irrelevant.
demonstration in the piece, it may be connected. There we are. Winston Eade, Bethan Francis and Dan Peter Reeves there, the people behind Jesus Camp, the comedy musical. You can go and see that every day up until the 30th of August at the venue known as Laughing Horse at the Newsroom. The Newsroom being a pub. The show is absolutely free. It starts at 5 o'clock every day and you can see it right up until the 30th of August, excepting the 25th. And I gave Jesus Camp, the comedy musical, 4 stars. And there's a huge amount of potential in the people who wrote it. I expect to see more from them in the future. But now, on to another 5-star show. A fantastic show called Ushers, the Front of House Musical. Now, this was in London recently, last year, but this version has a completely new cast, and the director has done some interesting new things, including a fantastic new finale. So let's listen to an extract of a long conversation I had with the very excellent Max Reynolds, the director of Ushers, the Front of House Musical, when we discussed the slightly unusual but all to be admired nature of the relationships, the 2 central relationships in this fantastic musical, which, despite being a comedy, is based absolutely on truthfulness, relationships which really rang true. Here's Max Reynolds. One of the lovely things about this show, and you said there were all these different plot strands, but one of the ones that's the most emotional, if you can describe it that way, is the love relationship, which is a relationship under strain and how that's going to develop and resolve or not. But it's a gay relationship, and that is lovely. It isn't often done. It's not done nearly enough. But it's entirely, well, it came across entirely plausibly. It's also almost entirely immaterial that it's a gay relationship because it's about the relationship. And the audience, I think, took it that way, absolutely. But
Yeah.
did you think this is actually something a little bit brave as well? At any stage?
Well, actually,
Or is it now so?
Yeah, no. Well, at the time, that relationship was meant to be the Stephen and Lucy couple, and then that changed. There's in one of the moments of the show, there's one of the ushers gives this lovely monologue about the truth of being an usher, and that in the original format wasn't his character at all. It was the female character.
Oh right, okay.
So that got developed over the rewrites. Yeah, and we wanted to show a sort of a truthful side to work in front of house. You get the big over the top world, which theatre generally is, and we love
the glitter.
The glitter, yes. But amongst all that is heart there, and that's explored in that relationship.
It certainly is.
And I don't think at the time we did it as necessarily like a shock factor. Sort of working in theatre and being involved in theatre, obviously, you get a lot of gay people.
It's a very liberal
yes,
environment, of course.
Absolutely,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
So when we were
Thank
working
God.
on it, we never thought this is going to be a sort of controversial issue at all.
No.
We just wanted to show something that's a bit truthful, really, and we never wanted to go too stereotyped with that either, because again, it just wouldn't be the right pitch for it. And I know, working in theatre, so many couples that have this dilemma of someone gets a job working abroad for a year contract on a cruise or whatever, and they have this decision of, do they do a long-term relationship? They're suddenly thrown into this situation. Do they want to stay with their partner, or do they want to go and do what they've been training for and they love doing and work as they want to be working? But then it means leaving their partner for a year, sometimes longer.
Acting life is a hard life.
It
despite
is,
what the
yes.
papers say.
Yes, and even touring is tough as well. Even if you're in the UK but still touring around, it certainly does add strains to relationships. So we definitely, during the rewrites, wanted to look at that side of the theatre industry and explore that. which I think the two guys do beautifully in this production, as the previous cast have done it as well.
Rory and Ben play.
That's right.
Unhelpfully, Ben and Gary, but the one called Ben isn't playing Ben.
Yes, that was slightly confusing in rehearsals
Yes.
for a couple of days. And I think James Rocker has done a lovely job of intertwining that story throughout the show and given it so much heart.
But as you said, it's not controversial. It clearly wasn't intended to be controversial. It is just lovely that it is what it is.
Yes.
And it makes no difference. But also it gives the show a great deal of heart.
Yes.
But I just wondered if anyone had made the observation that it just isn't very common on stage, even today,
Yeah.
to see a central gay couple.
Yeah, I mean, I've not heard anything from that at all, so I don't know what the general sort of feedback is. I guess now we just sort of take it for the norm, which is great. It's how it should be, and I'm so
We are
glad.
in 21st century Britain,
exactly,
after all.
yes, exactly, and I'm so glad. America have also joined with us with gay marriage and equal rights and things. So
Quite right too.
for me, it's never sort of jumped out as being something that shouldn't be there, and actually it's quite nice that is the norm, and we just accept that now. So,
Well, I do like, because there is another relationship in there, which
Yes.
is, as you say, the Lucy Stephen relationship. And that's a heterosexual relationship. But interestingly, and this is not to underplay it, because it pays off, but it is almost the second comedy couple, which is a traditional musical theatre trope, of course, which might have been more traditionally the gay couple in those, from a few years ago.
Yes, yeah.
You'd have them there, but they'd be the funny ones with the withering put-downs or whatever it is you were going to do with them. But what's lovely is every time these two couples sort of bump into each other, there's this sort of sudden darkness, except for the spotlight on their faces and a ding, kind of, and the audience loved it every time, because also every time they're trying to get together, as it were, or to talk even, something comes along and separates them. So they have this kind of sort of comic role, whilst at the same time being quite legitimately, it's not a send-up, it's they are genuinely interested in each other, so that's lovely too.
I really like that relationship. It always puts a smile on my face. And again, the reason why I think it works, we obviously play on this, the cheesy musical theatre lovers who meet at first sight and fall in love. But also, I'm sure we've all been in a situation where you meet someone new for the first time and there's that moment of connection there. Chemistry, absolutely. So that's what we've played on. And also, when they're not in this sort of love ting world, which is what we call it. Their dialogues are sometimes awkward as they're trying to get to know each other, and they're trying to be sort of flirty and cheeky, but it comes out the wrong way, and they both have these awkward lines that they keep coming up with, and then find themselves in these awkward situations, which I'm sure we've all been which I think it just lands every time, because it's so relatable, that story.
There's lots of lovely comedy moments in that which are not overplayed, and because they are not overplayed, there's a lovely moment, I think, when Stephen bends over to pick something up and Lucy basically has a very good look at his arms.
Yes.
And is caught doing so, I think, as
Yes.
well. So there's a... but it's not... whack kind of comedy, if I can describe it that way. It is. It's actually the comedy of social embarrassment, as well as
absolutely,
natural reactions in the social context, which wouldn't encourage that. So that's lovely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We wanted as many of those awkward moments where you meet someone for the first time who you have feelings for, and there's that kind of awkward flirting going on. We had lots of fun sort of finding those little moments.
You give Stephen lots of embarrassing moments because his best friend is Ben, who's one of the gay couple, of course. So there's a certain amount of mock gay banter as well there. So
absolutely, yeah.
Well, that was Max Reynolds, the director of Ushers, the front of house musical. It was a real pleasure to speak to him, and it was an absolute delight to see that show. It was one of the very few shows in Edinburgh I saw twice. Such was its quality. And I recommend that you go if you can. And here's how you can. It's on until the 30th of August at a venue called Momentum Venues. It's a new venue. It's based in St Stephen's in the New Town, and it's on every evening at 9:30. It's actually a fantastic venue for this show, so it's a great show in a great venue, with a great cast, greatly directed. In fact, it's all great. I gave it 5 stars and called it a modern screwball comedy, fun unbounded, the best night out at the Fringe. Well now, what next? I think it's time to give a shout out to an old friend of this programme, Finn Anderson, who wrote last year's pick of the Fringe, Alba. He's back at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe this year in a very different capacity. He's acting as the musical director and accompanist in a very interesting cabaret called Cat Loud's Big Night In. And Finn plays the music, on a number of instruments, which shows his versatility, and sings along with Kat, who has a wide-eyed and intimate presence in her performance. If you want to go and see Cat Loud's Big Night In, go to Laughing Horse at Moriarty's, Moriarty's being a pub. It's on every day until the 30th at 1:55, and the show is free. But if that's light and songful and tuneful and happy, then there are other shows which are perhaps not. There's a musical about a group of people whose lives were directly affected by the outbreak of the First World War, and the show is called Poppies. I spoke to an old friend of this programme, Josh Clark, who you may remember I've spoken to in the last couple of years about things at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and he and I both saw this show at different times and both came away with different views. So let's hear what the lovely Josh Clark thinks about Poppies. The next show we're going to be talking about is quite the reverse of that. It's the build-up and beginning of a war, in this case the war to end all wars, which didn't, unfortunately, which is of course the Great War, the First World War, very much in vogue in theatrical terms at the moment because of the centenary, still ongoing. And that's a musical show called Poppies.
Yes.
Now, we both saw this, but once again, different performances. I'd very much like to hear your take on it, and then we'll hear mine, and then we'll see if there's any difference or agreement.
Yeah, so we have held off discussing this between ourselves.
We have. We don't know what we're going to say.
No. But I'll certainly set my stall out and say that this has been the best musical theatre show I've seen at the Fringe this year, by quite a long way, actually, in terms of my enjoyment of it. But no, it's a really well worth seeing piece, and I intend fully to go back and see it
a second time.
Yeah, in a non-professional capacity, as it were, at the weekend. A new piece by a fairly young company. It's Music Box Theatre Company. Well, yeah, that's my initial view. What do you think?
Well, I'd like to. Could you briefly describe what happens?
Okay,
without ruining the storyline.
Yeah, sure. Well,
let's set it up.
Essentially, it's the story of a group of friends at the start of the First World War. I think
It's the summer of 1914. Just before the declaration of war.
Yes, that's right. And they are a young folk music group, which a central conceit is that they are all actor musicians. They all are preparing for a town music festival.
Yeah, it's their summer fete, in fact.
Summer fete,
yeah.
And the basic plot point is that they all get taken away from each other in certain capacities during the war, and it's the effect of these broken love relationships and how they might be repaired by the end, I suppose.
Now, for a First World War musical, I thought it was somewhat unusual because it did what most musicals attempting to cover the Second World War do,
yes.
Which is address the home front as well as the military front on the continent. And so we have the men basically go to war, and the women, at least at first, stay at home and toil on the land. They seem to be running a farm, as far as I can see. Women then volunteer to become part of the VAD, which is basically the Red Cross kind of thing. So they all become nurses on the front. And then they go over, and it's because of their longing and lamenting, and of course people are in danger, and we won't ruin how it ends in case people do get a chance to see it. But usually First World War things are about the trials on the front and the waiting to go over the top and that kind of thing. They very rarely refer to the business at home, whereas the Second World War, that's very much what nearly always happens in the Second World War musical. Now, I must say, and this is a question I've grappled with in musical talk for some years, that we know there are great World War I songs. There's a huge cultural outpouring from the First World War, and there are great musicals about the First World War. Oh, What a Lovely War,
exactly,
being a fine example, and great drama as well. But there's less from the Second World War, and I've never been able to work out why. And I have come to the conclusion over the years that actually it's because the First World War, quite wrongly, but is popularly remembered as having one focal point, which is the trench warfare. I mean, it was obviously a world war and there was a lot more going on, but that's how it is remembered. That is where the drama has come from, and it's a very simple and awful situation, so it breeds drama like nothing else. The Second World War is over the world as well, but in so many different planes and so many different worlds, and there are whole wars going on that different countries concentrate on because their troops are involved in, and less. In Britain, we know what parts of it. If you talk to a British soldier and an American soldier, they will have quite often very different recollections of the Second World War or understandings of the Second World War, because the spheres of the war were quite often in different places geographically, let alone anything else. And you've got the home front as well, which gives it that extra dimension. The home front in the First World War is harder to portray. So, the reason I say all that is because I didn't enjoy Poppies at the same level that you enjoyed it. And I will be honest with you, it wasn't the music. I thought the music was very enjoyable. I'm not a great fan of folk particularly, but it fitted the piece tremendously well. And there were a number of styles. I mean, I think the character's name was Lenny. He sings rather almost a military musical march is what I would describe it as, when he's all eager to sign up, and that worked really well. And it's an unusual form of music in a folk context, actually, that kind of tune as well. It's not quite pa, but it was certainly it was, as I say, a military music hall kind of march. I think it's the best way I can describe it. And so I thought the score worked very well. Well, there you are. If you want to find out more about Poppies, you can see it. It's on at 7:35 every evening until the 29th of August at a venue called The Space at Triplex. But it wasn't the only musical at the Fringe which looked at the horror of war. There was at least one more. It was called Untold Wars, a new verbatim musical. And it was a tremendously powerful show. I sat down with Emily Taylor and Chloe Shipley to talk about what a verbatim musical actually is, and to speak also about how their show came to be.
My name's Emily Taylor, and I'm the composer and musical director of Untold Wars, which is a new verbatim musical at the Fringe.
And my name is Chloe Shipley, and I am the choreographer and the co-director of Untold Wars.
Oh, splendid. Well, I think we have all the creative people here. Now, it's a verbatim musical. I think there's going to be some people who will not know what that is. Verbatim theatre has been around for a while, but verbatim musical feels like a moderately new genre. Thank you, London Road. So would you care to explain what you see verbatim musicals as, and tell us something about the show?
Well, a verbatim musical is where the content of the show is taken from real accounts, true stories. And verbatim actually means word for word. So we have used accounts from diary extracts, blogs online, and interviews with people, some we know and some we don't know, and experiences that people have written down and sent to us as the content and the lyrics in our show.
For our show, we had to do a lot of research to find out what stories we could find and what stories hadn't really been known to the public. So the untold aspect of it is so like people know about female soldiers, or people know about photographers or journalism, but people don't know specifically them stories. So we aim to find the stories which we could maybe dramatise and use. Like for instance, like the sock song is my own story. So I wrote down my story, and we then were able to compose it exactly how I'd said it. So every word that I say then gets transposed into a song and then dramatised, and then we can perform it. So that's the same thing with every single story. It's either a letter, an account, an interview, or we've researched, found them, and then brought them to the table to direct them.
So these basically the private and intimate feelings of people who are either soldiers or connected with soldiers in the military over time, because it seems to run for about a century. There's stuff from the First World War all the way up to now, which goes to show that war is a constant, unfortunately, which is actually one of the themes of your show as well, of course, the opening and closing number, and make that pretty plain.
I'm glad you spotted that.
Well, unfortunately, I also read the papers, so it was contextually it was there too, wasn't it? But you've also... what you do is, as you say, you take these extracts, then you set them to music, having sort of... you stay true to the authenticity of what's being said, but you do have to cut, dissect, rearrange and remodel in order to make a song. Because there's at least one song where there are rhymes and people don't speak like that. So tell us a little bit more about that process, because that strikes me as absolutely fabulous, because a lyricist in a usual musical would be able to say, actually, with their composer, this isn't working, why don't you change the music, why don't I change the lyric, and you can come to a sort of neutral position. But the lyrics are, in this, shall we say, are inviolable, except you can rearrange them, but you cannot change them. And that's a very interesting constraint.
How that would work is that I would take the text and I would find lines that I found interesting or that I thought explained the story. Sometimes it would be the whole chunk paragraph, or sometimes there'd be a line further down and I'd miss out a bit in between.
It could be a series of quotations from a piece.
So I've worked in that way. I've not changed, if it's a full sentence, I've not changed the sentence, but I might put a different one underneath it that wasn't necessarily the next thing they said.
That doesn't stop it being anything other than authentic, though, does it? Because,
no.
And I think authenticity is what gives this its power.
Yeah.
These are the words of the real men and women involved in whatever way they are involved. And I think, I will say that I think the word to describe this show is powerful.
Yeah.
Did you get that when you were creating, when you were assembling, I suppose is the best way of putting it? You know, does the power come from the written word, or is it that transmogrification into a song that really adds something to it? I mean, the words will, of course, mean something. Because words
I think it's
do and always
both,
have
because
done.
when you hear the actual lyrics from some of the things, you kind of put yourself in their situation, and that's what makes the whole characterization process so powerful and like meaningful for us, because it's like we actually become that person, and you kind of have to be truthful to their story. You can't just act it like you want to just go and act a musical. You have to be truthful and do it some justice.
Yes, you can't have too many different readings of this. I imagine if a different group put your piece on,
Yeah.
it wouldn't feel a million miles away from what you've done. It might be choreographed differently or staged slightly differently, but the power, that comes from the text and the music together.
Yeah.
That's in no way to dismiss the choreography, which I think is astounding, and actually a really important third part of this. With you have the music and the words, and you have the acting, but the choreography really adds some oomph to it, because you're in a dynamic situation from the off. You have people drilling, you have people in war zones, there's sound effects of fights, there's a loud soundscape which helps add to that sort of warfield feeling, and you have a funeral, you have people, as I say, doing drill and quite difficult work.
Yeah.
You have there's a fight, isn't there? There's a kind of boxing match kind of thing, which is stagey almost. I don't mean that in an artificial way, but I mean it's it's part of the look. You've considered it in the whole. So when addressing a verbatim musical, you think, right, this is what we're going to do. When did you realise that choreography was going to be an important part? Was it always in your early vision, or is that something you thought, actually, we need this extra dimension?
I think we wanted to kind of portray how hard it is for soldiers to go through the training. We had kind
to
of
be soldiers.
Yeah, we first of all decided that we'd split it into like 6 sections. So we'd have like after war, before war, people at home, training and whatever. So the training bit was obviously we found the bit when we had the snipers and we were all charging and things. And then the other part of the training was actually the physical, because obviously to be trained as a soldier you have to be trained physically and mentally. So we wanted to use the physical aspect and make that a scene which people could. We obviously found a monologue. We wrote a monologue that we got from somebody who knew someone who was in the army, so we kind of got all that. We wanted to put that to some movement rather than a scene or a song.
Yeah.
So obviously Max did his monologue in there, and it was just kind of, as far as the verbatim thing, it was just trying to keep it as real, the choreography as real to what people do. So like I went and took part in a military, like one of those army camp things for an hour, just to kind of see just to get a taste of it, like a boot camp thing, and I went to one of them and then I could see the different things that they were doing and like the drills and the circuits and things, so I tried to incorporate that in the choreography, just to kind of show what goes on in like a 5-minute scene.
Untold Wars, a new verbatim musical. If you want to go and see it, and I think you should if you get the chance, you can. It's on until the 22nd of August. It's on at 8:50 in the evening at the venue known as Greenside in Nicholson Square. I gave Untold Wars 5 stars and called it powerful, punchy and provocative. Remember, all these shows I'm telling you about are currently still available, and if you get the chance, you should try and go along and see them, and many, many others besides. These are just the shows which I saw and which I particularly liked or thought were important. To find out more, go to the Ed Fringe website. It's called edfringe.com. Very easy to find, very easy to navigate, and you can book tickets there and find out about all these shows and many, many others. And now for something completely different in tone, but it was a wonderful, quirky, strange tone, and it was very funny and very musical, and I loved it. It's called The Quentin Dentin Show, and I had the great pleasure of talking to Henry Carpenter, who plays Quentin Dentin, the eponymous character, and we discussed the approach he took, the inspiration for the character of Quentin Dentin, and also about the score. And to give you a taste of that score, let's hear one song from it, before we hear an extract of my conversation with Henry.
100 years ago, you got no peace of mind. You'd struggle sober through the vast expanse of time. Then benefactors came and you were redesigned. And now you're clean and bright and everything is fine. Doesn't come for free, you have to make some sacrifices. You have to turn the cameras on and feed the databases. But soon you learn to ward away your existential crisis with lots of friends and lovely films and beautiful devices. And everything is fine. Where can I find the beautiful? The billboards show the proof. Their faces are inscrutable, their pictures tell the truth. Their cheekbones are unstoppable, their haircuts are divine. No need to be unsociable when everything is fine.
The character of Quentin is derived sort of from two main areas. It's derived from the sort of classic, supercilious, patronising doctors of British comedy, people like, as embodied by people like Jonathan Miller in Beyond the Fringe, and also a huge inspiration for Quentin was Graham Garden from The Goodies.
You have just said the most magical words in my life. Thank you. I'd like to marry your clone.
I'm a huge fan of The Goodies, but
so am I.
But do you know what I mean? Then Graham from The Goodies is a big.
And he's the intellectual heart of that, as well as well as being wackily over the top.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, it's a huge thing for Quentin was Graham Garden, who was also kind of the main writer on The Goodies as well. So he gave himself all the best stuff. Well, all the ones where he goes mad and sort of becomes really monomaniacal.
If there is a format to The Goodies, there's three of them, and they represent different strands of British life.
That's
in a way,
right.
Actually, you know, you've got Bill Oddie, who's the
working class.
Yes, if you like. You've got Tim Brooke Taylor, who's the middle class, and you've got Graham, who represents, I suppose, the intelligentsia in some sense.
Yeah.
And the theory is that every week one of them goes mad with some kind of delusion, carries it off to the absolutely nth degree, and then the other two have to sort of resolve the problem. That's a thumbnail sketch of that formula. I'm so delighted you love The Goodies, because it's my all-time favourite comedy programme, so thank you. But yes, Graham Garden is one of our most intelligent comics as well.
Yeah.
I mean, even on the radio today. So thank you. Right, I've interrupted you, but thank you for letting me.
No, absolutely. Well, so Graham Garden was a huge thing for Quentin, just in terms of that kind of I've always got the right answer, and Graham Garden is even when you watch him on The Goodies and he's magnetic, like he's someone who really fills the stage and kind of like grabs your attention. But then on the other side of it, you've got huge inspiration for me for Quentin, and just for all of my other work too, was David Bowie is kind of my probably greatest inspiration for me out of anything, and a large part of that is in his performance and the way that he creates these incredibly striking images and looks, and he knows better than almost anyone else, I think, how to use stillness and poise to almost intimidate an audience into loving him. And a huge part of Quentin is derived from Bowie, image-wise. The white suit, the white hair, that's all Serious Moonlight, early 80s Bowie, and that's a very conscious reference. But also in terms of his movement and his kind of demeanour on stage, very much sort of Thin White Duke, sort of 1976 kind of era Bowie. And the third big influence for the character of Quentin, but also this is mainly for the friends and the look of the band, was the American rock group Devo, who are not very fashionable at the moment, but Devo for me are one of the kind of greatest pop chemists of theatre and intense, heady, ideological, subversive stuff and music that broke the mainstream. They're absolutely incredible, and one of their greatest achievements, I think, was kind of breaking out in their early years, playing all of this music, which was very rocky and very accessible to the ear, but was all kind of about being mechanical and being sort of sapped of emotion, and doing it all wearing boiler suits, so they'd just come from a kind of chemical processing plant.
Yeah.
And at a time when rock music was all about sort of the overblown pomposity of the rock star as a kind of messiah figure, completely obliterating their own identities. And that is something that I find hugely. I'm just Devo. Kind of, I think that they're beyond geniuses and criminally underrated by people in musical theatre, I should add, who I think would really get a lot from them. And there's a great deal of Devo DNA in the Quentin Denton show.
But what an interesting fusion, if you don't mind me saying. The marriage there it's quite interesting. I mean, just picking up strands. The Jonathan Miller superciliousness and Graham Garden kind of controlled by less, almost. Less is more, very much with those characters and the characters they portray. Plus the heightened performance art of, and I use the word advisedly, but of David Bowie. Plus the removal of self to create a bigger issue.
Yes,
and
that's exactly it. Yeah.
You marry those three things together, you've got...
Well, you've got Quentin.
You have indeed, absolutely. But what an interesting dynamic. Gosh, that's very interesting. That is really quite remarkable, I think. To be honest, I also love that character. How easy is it for you to be that person?
It's extremely easy for me to be Quentin. I'm naturally quite supercilious and quite remote when I'm not trying to engage, and
thoughtful, perhaps.
Yeah, or somewhere else. As I said to you earlier before we began recording, I can't improvise Quentin, because all the words that come out of Quentin's mouth are very, very carefully designed statements of propaganda of one sort or another. But it's very easy for me to inhabit the mannerisms and the sort of the moods and the temperature of Quentin.
So the character rather than the dialogue is easily yours.
The character is very easily mine, and you know, you said very kindly that I fill the stage with it, and you know, Quentin, that the reason that I'm able to do that with this character is because I have this background as a rock performer, where you know you go up on stage. In theatre, you're really privileged with the audience's attention. You know, if you're a rock band, you know, you go up on stage in a place where, you know, you really have to earn people's attention. You have to take people's attention from them. And, you know, you do that by jumping up and down and being magnetic. And Quentin really is about applying a lot of those performance techniques that I've had to learn as a rock performer with my band Jimmy Getaway. to the stage, where they seem so much bigger because, in theatres there's this expectation that you will be paid attention to, but I'm not used to that as a performer. I'm used to having to really earn people's attention.
Wonderful. First of all, you heard a song there from the Quentin Denton show, and then the creator of it, Henry Carpenter, who plays Quentin Denton in a very charismatic way, I think. He's a very striking individual with some very insightful things to say, as you'll hear in the full interview when it comes out. And when he talks about Graham Garden, Jonathan Miller and David Bowie, as they say, what's not to like? If you want to go and see the Quentin Denton show, you can. It's on almost perfectly timed to finish your day in a happy way at 10:10 in the evening at the venue known as The Space on Nidri Street, and it's on until the 29th of August, excepting the 23rd. I gave it 4 stars and called it unique, startling and very funny, like nothing I've ever seen. And now for another show which is not another million miles away, at least in tone. A very, very funny musical called Vampire Hospital Waiting Room. It already has a cult following here in Edinburgh. In fact, in the queue to get in, I met someone who said she had travelled over from New Zealand specifically to see this show being performed live. It's an absolute hoot from first to last, and I strongly recommend it. It's a free show, certainly at the moment in Edinburgh, and you can see it every day until the 31st of August, and it's on at 1:15 in the afternoon. That title again, Vampire Hospital Waiting Room. Think 1950s B-movie, horror film, science fiction film turned into a comedy musical, and you've got it. An excellent musical. Time, I think, for another song. This is a song by Tanya Holt, who is up in Edinburgh with a fantastic show called Cautionary Tales for Daughters, Songs Your Mother Never Taught You. And I was able to catch up with her after one of her shows, which I absolutely loved. So let's hear this song from that show, and then a short extract of my conversation with Tanya afterwards.
I wanna be a cowboy riding on the plains, just me and Pepito, my pony, fighting engines in wigwams. Me and Pepito be famous, daring dudes would make our name. I'd be a star in the saloon bar, win a fortune in a game. But I can't be no cowboy, Mom says girls can't ride alone. You can make a cowboy joyful, give him a happy home. Baking a scrumptious apple pie, wear ribbons in your hair. No, Mary, this can't be. Girls should not want that. You should try being a princess, Mary. I wanna be a cowboy, I'd leave Mary to her pies. I'd learn to shoot at old tin cans, I'd win the rodeo prize. My lasso would be the fastest, I'd catch them rolling steers. The girls would all admire me, I'd hear the grown men cheer. You can't be no cowboy, you have to be a squaw. If you wanna play this game with us, abide by the schoolyard law. Saloon dancer or be a horse, that's what girls should be. No, you can't play this game with us, 'cause she's cannot be he's. I wanna be a cowboy out there on my own, just me and Pepito, my buddy. The wilds would be our home. We'd ride away from people, no one to make us sad, by telling me that we can't dream about things we'll never have.
this cowboy talk of yours and be like other girls. Put on a dress and play with dolls, wear your hair in curls. Pa gets real mad at me, hates my boyish ways, says he'll love me once again when I'm through my cowboy phase. I wanna be a cowboy, but it's proving mighty hard. Me and Pepito are getting lonesome in the yard. So I will be a princess, that's what I gotta be. I'll squeeze this cowboy out of me and set Pepito free. Mary, Mary, drive my, someday you'll see the world is full of cowgirls roaming happily.
Now, we've got to talk about Hilaire Belloc because, you know, he is the father of the cautionary tale sort of concept.
Indeed,
almost.
he is, yes.
And his name is still, there are many people who've not really heard of him, but that name will ring a bell. And because he very famously wrote a series of cautionary tales.
He did. He was most famous for that. In fact, he wrote a lot of poetry which hasn't seen the light of day, but
No.
his cautionary tales are still told to children today. And he was writing at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. And he was a sort of kind of, I'd say, I'm a great fan of Roald Dahl, but he was a sort of predecessor to Roald Dahl.
He's a prototype, isn't
Yeah,
he,
and
in some senses?
Roald Dahl never had any fear of depicting adults as really nasty people. He told, which I think is why children like those books so much. And Hilaire Belloc was actually quite similar as well. So, yeah, he was definitely the inspiration originally, and now I've done lots of research. I've got lots of different avenues of inspiration.
Well, funny enough, I'd like to say it's a British tradition. I don't know if it is strictly British, but you can trace it all the way back to Lewis Carroll, that concept of adults in a maelstrom of a world which you're struggling to understand.
Yes.
It is, it's the Queen of Hearts who's the bad one, isn't it?
Yes.
She is the ultimate authority figure, not just because she's Queen, but because of her personality, which is so broad and encompassing. To be part of that tradition is quite interesting, I think. It's a golden thread through British culture.
Yes.
And you are very much tapping into that.
Well, I hope so, and I hope that these themes and these songs speak to a very wide group of people. I actually had a group of teenaged schoolgirls in, and I was quite surprised to see them because it's a brand new show, so I'm still learning now who my audience actually are, and I was absolutely amazed by how much they got out of it. They were incredibly keen, they laughed in all the right places. Good. They wanted to chat after the show, and it never occurred to me that a 16-year-old might get so much out of it. And I, as you mentioned earlier, I did a song about Chanel the labelled girl who's basically obsessed with Louis Vuitton, Nike, all those labels, and ends up in prison because of it. And they all love that one.
Really?
Yes, and I think it's just giving them the opportunity to laugh at how silly it is, rather than being in the pressurised school arena where you're expected to enjoy those things and put value on them.
Well, the great thing about theatre when it works well is it does take you out of society to allow you to look upon it. Which is basically the basis of satire, isn't it, in a way? And your show is very satirical.
It is very satirical,
so,
yes.
Also, that song is, I suspect, easy to understand because it's, as we said earlier, it's beautifully done, but in the simple way of, here is the story, I'm telling you the story. The story is beautifully
it's a completely
told,
straightforward cautionary tale, yes. There's nothing underlying about that one. But then I do one about Princess Sylvia, which is actually my favourite one to sing. And
she's the one in the Ivory Tower.
She's in the Ivory Tower, and she starts out as a 4-year-old girl in school, being very sort of pretty and clever and having all those things that might be useful in life. And she basically just gets inured to all the praise and love that she's receiving. But her main problem is that she can't make up her mind, and although ultimately she wants to have a family and settle down, and she has so many offers of that, she is just always waiting for one more to come along until eventually she's 80 and she's still in her ivory tower. And I depict her as a beauty queen wearing a sash and a rather unpleasant crown from from Frozen.
And once again, do you know the saga of Jenny?
I do, yes, Kurt Weill.
There's a touch of that as well.
There is,
the woman
yes.
who would not make up her mind.
Yes, yes.
So, but you are a very accomplished performer. It's interesting to me that this is a fresh show, you're finding out who your audience are, but you must have experience of songwriting and performing, because you're immaculate from first to last.
That's very kind of you, thank you. Well, I love performing, I live for it. I started as an actress and then found my voice, and I've been a freelance cabaret singer for a very long time. I have an act with another lady, and that is the mainstay of my income. Is that?
Oh, right, okay. So you've
yes,
got a core act.
I do.
And we know what that's called? So
it's called Shoo Shoo Baby.
How are you spelling that?
Shoo Shoo Baby, SHOO Baby. And we've been all over the world actually. We've been together for 15 years.
Right.
We take songs by Meatloaf, Verdi, Cole Porter.
Why did they all work together?
They do, strangely. And we do new arrangements, close harmony arrangements. And it's funny and it's a bit camp, and we include the audience. And we're still going strong to this very day. We always think, oh, next year, that'll be our last year. And then, and then it goes on. Yeah.
But this show,
yeah.
So it's premiered here in Edinburgh.
It has, yes. You've just seen its 7th show. Its
really?
7th
I feel very honoured.
performance.
Well, it feels like it's... when I say dyed in the wool, I don't mean that in any kind of fusty sense. I mean in the sense of it's stable, it's secure, it's a confident show that seems to know what it's doing.
Well, I spent a long time working on it, and I felt when I got here for the first performance that actually, despite thinking I didn't know the show, actually I've kind of completely absorbed it, and I'm loving it, and I'm finding every single day I'm finding some new thing to do within the show.
There we are, cautionary tales for daughters, songs your mother never taught you. And if you want to go and see that, it's a perfect start to the day. It's on at 10:15 in the morning, and you can see it at the Space at Surgeons Hall. I very much enjoyed the show, and I gave it 5 stars, calling it immaculate, funny, thoughtful, and full of zest. But Tanya isn't the only woman performing splendid sort of one-person shows or cabaret shows in Edinburgh this year. Unusually, Dilly Keane is appearing without Fascinating Aida, with her first one-woman show for some years. I went to see it and I loved it. She is a class act, there is simply no doubting it, and I strongly recommend that people of all ages go and see her fantastic show. It's really a trip through her back catalogue of songs, but those songs are so good, so strong, so funny or touching, that they are always worth hearing again. Go and see her at the Underbelly in George Square. She's on at 6:05 in the evening until the 31st of August, excepting the 19th. An excellent way to start an evening. And a very excellent way to finish an evening is Bebe and Luna present the Cabaret Farce. This is again on at Momentum Venues in St Stephen's and starts at 10 o'clock in the evening, lasting about an hour, and runs every day until the 30th of August. Now, Bebe and Luna are tremendously talented singers, and they really know how to carry a song. The cabaret that they perform is also very funny, and there was something else in it which I cannot recommend highly enough, and that is their backing jazz trio. Calling themselves the Sazerac Boys, they performed some of the best jazz music I've heard. I could listen to them literally all evening, and I wish I'd had the opportunity to do so. They are Scott Westerby, Jack Lawrence Blakey and Brandon Plummer, and the 3 of them make fantastic music together. They're also 3 of the nicest people you could possibly imagine. It was my privilege to get to know them a little bit, because I went to see this show twice. It was that good. I'm very keen to see Bebe and Luna again, and I'm very keen to see Brandon, Jack and Scott again. And I do hope that the 3 of them will have a chance to work together as a jazz trio again in the future. And watch out for those names, they're actor-musicians, and you'll hear more from them in the future, I have absolutely no doubt. So that's Bebe and Luna present the Cabaret Farce, and I gave that 4 stars. Well, now for a name that you may remember from previous episodes of Musical Talk. I had the chance of catching up with John Hinton. Now, in 2009, John Hinton performed a musical about the life of Charles Darwin, and it was fantastic, a marvellous, marvellous show. He's a charismatic man on stage, and he's able to both entertain and educate in the easiest, most satisfactory way possible through entertainment. Well, over the years he's built up a trilogy of musicals about scientists, and it is called the Science Trilogy. Haha! One about Marie Curie, one about Albert Einstein, and of course his original Charles Darwin show. I had the pleasure of catching up again with John, having seen all 3 shows over 3 different days, to talk about them. Let's hear a little about how the shows came to be and his approach to educating, which is such an important part of them.
Hello, my name is John Hinton. I'm here at Edinburgh Fringe Festival where I'm doing 3 shows which are what we're calling our Science Trilogy of musical comedies about scientists. I'm doing a new show about Marie Curie called The Element in the Room, a radioactive musical comedy about the death and life of Marie Curie. Then we're also bringing back a show that I first did here 2 years ago called Albert Einstein, Relatively Speaking. And we're also doing a show that I first did here, 6 years ago, I believe it was, called The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Survival of Evolutionary Theories in the Face of Scientific and Ecclesiastical Objections, being a musical comedy about Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882.
And I think, just for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to call them the Darwin Show.
The Darwin Show, the Einstein Show, yes, exactly, yeah. We'll do that.
I'm going to, because I've seen all 3.
Yes.
All 3 are fantastic. But what's interesting to me is that you are almost the embodiment in theatrical and musical theatrical terms of Lord Reith and his principles, because you do inform, you do educate, and you certainly do entertain.
Yes, right.
That's actually quite a difficult balance to find. These shows have real love in them. You embody the people who you're representing, but more importantly, you embody the ideas. The Marie Curie one, she actually says, stop talking about people and let's talk about ideas. So
yes.
Let's talk about the ideas.
Yes.
How did you come to think, how has this particular trilogy come to be, and what were you trying to get out of it?
It came to be because I wanted to write a solo show, and I'd always loved Charles Darwin, and The Origin of Species was one of my favourite books, and I thought I'd try to adapt that into theatre. And in the writing process, at some point during the writing process, that became a musical. It wasn't originally intended as a musical, it was intended as a solo show. It became a solo musical. And after, I took that to my good friend who's directed the shows, and he helped develop the script. And after that, you go around doing a show about Charles Darwin. People inevitably ask, who's the next scientist? And, who would you like it to be, you say? And I actually did a bit of a survey in my networks of who people would like to see, and it was Einstein and Nikola Tesla came out on top. So obviously Einstein has also always been a great fan. And then you just have to complete the trilogy, don't you? And for many, many reasons, it just had to be Marie Curie to complete it. And they're all musical comedies. They're all have similar things and very different things to them. What you said about the embodiment of whatever the
Reithian principles.
Exactly. I guess in all of them I'm there as well. Yeah, John is on stage giving, embodying the character, and maybe that's what unites them all. That and in the Curie piece, more than in the others, I do break out of character and do it, and I'm very honest about the fact that it's me standing there in front of the audience. It goes more meta. Still, of course, wearing a dress, because that dress, it takes a little while to get into, this a beautiful dress that we've had made especially for the show, custom made. There was an original idea that I would actually get into the dress during the show, during the first song of the show. But yeah, when it was made in as a one-piece lovely dress, it was
the practical considerations.
Well, quite, yes.
But I really want to talk about the ideas behind it and the ideas you put through. There is this huge. I actually went today to see the Einstein show. A friend of mine, he is a teacher, and he adored it. He adored it as a theatrical piece. He adored it as a comedy, and he adored it as a way of educating. He came out and said, "I have learned something." And then he said, "And that business about inert speeds." I think.
Yes, the inertial reference frame. Yes, that one.
You to say.
Yeah.
He said that's really useful for children to understand.
Right.
And so he was entranced by that. But actually, I think you do something much more clever than that, because I think you can educate adults, and adults are much harder to educate in some senses because they resist it, or they can do.
Yeah.
Particularly when they think they're out for a happy play.
Yeah.
you dabble with some truly interesting and complicated issues.
Mm.
In the Darwin one, of course, it's evolution.
Mm.
In the Einstein one, you do something amazing, which is both the special and the normal theories of relativity.
In general, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in the Marie Curie one, you do the alpha and the beta breakdowns of various forms of radioactivity.
Yes.
My word, these are concepts just to talk about, let alone illustrate.
Yes.
You have an educator in you somewhere, clearly.
Right. Yeah.
How did you? But your theatrical history is physical.
Physical theatre, yes.
Exactly.
Jacques Lecoq in Paris and all that. Yeah, absolutely.
There's no
That's what I
reason
studied.
to suggest they're non-exclusive. Of course they're not, because you're a highly intelligent man. But
Right.
actually being able to harness one
Mm.
to get the other across is a huge achievement and a masterful achievement. I ask you, I make the statement. The question now is, how difficult was it for you?
I get excited about the ideas, and I want to transmit that to other people. If I find an idea that I don't understand, then I make sure I understand it fully, and then I get so excited in doing that's what I store up, and that's what I transmit.
Transmit is an interesting term as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I guess, because there are several ways of doing it. You know, you're doing it by explaining. You're doing it through analogies. You're doing it through song, through interaction. You're not just lecturing.
No.
You know, you're transmitting in many forms.
Well, that was John Hinton. That man has talent coming out of his ears. If you want to see his shows, and I really suggest you do, you can. The Marie Curie show is on the 21st, the 24th, the 28th and the 31st of August. The Einstein show is on the 20th, the 23rd, the 27th and the 30th of August. And the Darwin show is on the 19th, the 22nd, the 26th and the 29th of August. And they're all in the venue known as Pleasance 2 in the Pleasance Courtyard at 3:30. To see one will be fantastic. To see all three is amazing. And I have done it. I gave each of those shows 5 stars. Well, time for some music. And a slight change in tone, because the next show I'm going to be talking about is a fantastic light opera, which has been translated again into English in a very contemporary way, and staged in a very contemporary way, and is utterly accessible. It's a light comedy called The Secretary turned CEO, and I got to speak to Daniel Dondi, who's the very charming musical director of the show, and is one of the people behind it in terms of making it so accessible to a modern audience. I absolutely adored this piece. So, in a minute we'll hear a short extract of my conversation with Daniel, when we discuss the history of the piece and its surprisingly important role in the history of musical theatre. But before then, and indeed just afterwards, we'll hear some extracts from the score taken from a live recording. So, let's hear some music from The Secretary turned CEO.
Oh, you accuse me of everything and anything. The poor,
You're not.
world war,
You're but.
I won't have a
Oh, Do you agree with that? I agree. Is she left us?
Is she hot done right? I don't think so.
Is she in charge?
Is she hot done right?
Oh, no.
You gave me 20 pounds and you never asked for it back. You just deducted it from my salary. Such a generous boss.
I know.
Magnificent.
Munificent.
Benevolent. And you know, life is more expensive these days. My rent is way up, and my Oyster card at the end of the month. Every day you've got my payday now.
I know. When I buy my hummus in Waitrose, it's like £2. Damn it. Where is my master?
I want a raise.
Race? How dare you?
I need a raise.
How dare you, Serena?
I can't work anymore on minimum wage.
Are you trying to bankrupt me?
I do all the work around here and I deserve a raise.
Well, that's it. You're fired, damn it. How, I say, at events in your glossy bum. And get out of my offices this instant. I can stand your talk, your walk, or your stupid face anymore.
Yeah, whatever, you can't find me, you can't find me. Shut up, you can't find me. And I would pay corporation tax or national insurance or even VAT.
What? Since when?
Since ever.
And now, what's going to happen to us?
1 year, 2 years, 3 years prison.
Hi, I'm Daniel Dundee. I'm from Lucid Arts and Music, and we've got a show called The Secretary Turned CEO, which is playing at the Fringe Festival this year.
Now, this is a very interesting piece to me because it is a light comic opera, a chamber opera, I suppose it might be best described, but it's not in what I would call the sort of British understanding of a comic opera, which is Gilbert and Sullivan, which is more an operetta or a Savoy opera, a genre in its own right. It's much more in the European style of a light comic opera, isn't it? A sort of Marriage of Figaro and a Barbara Seville kind of thing. Would that be fair, or am I talking nonsense? Tell me if I'm talking nonsense.
No, absolutely. I think they're two really good archetypes, actually. The piece we've actually based it on is by Pergolesi, a composer from the 18th century. His comic intermezzo, La Salva Padrona, was one of the earliest examples of comic opera to emerge in Italy. And what happened, you'd have a serious opera going on, and in the interval the curtain would come down and a small troupe of singers would come out in front of the curtain and perform an intermezzo for the audience while they're
have a
having
support
their...
act in the middle,
Exactly.
essentially, to use.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and when I heard about this, I thought, that's a great idea, and actually translates weirdly well to the Fringe because it's the right length, it's the right sort of amount of performers, the right amount of, very little set or technical stuff to deal with.
Yes, it's a highly transportable show.
Exactly,
isn't it?
yes.
It's a beautiful little gem. It really is.
Thank you.
And you do it impeccably and beautifully. But let's talk a bit more about its genesis. So, how did you stumble across a musical with a pedigree like this? I use musical broadly, you understand?
That's absolutely fine, yeah. I moved in once with a bass singer called Dionysius Kiropoulos, who is now pursuing an academic career.
Very long calling card, I think.
Yes, absolutely. But at the time he was pursuing a singing career, and he showed me this piece, this Pergolesi, and said, "This is my favourite thing to sing. It's just right for my voice. Can we do it somewhere?" And I had a look at it and I thought, wow, this is a really great opera. It's got some fantastic arias in it. And actually, once I bothered to sit down with the translation and read the story, I thought it's very funny as well. It's got this kind of ridiculous farcical plot, and I thought
it's cheekily silly, isn't it? Really?
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. Lots of dressing up, lots of sort of disguises and tricks, and people being sort of unintentionally stupid.
And squabbling.
Yes, of course. Squabbling and bawdiness as well.
What's not to like, as I say.
Absolutely. I was quite surprised that this kind of thing existed so early, but then I read a bit more about it and I found out that it was sort of directly one of the direct inspirations for Mozart's comic operas that came a little later.
Forgive me, just in the history of musical theatre, I know everything branches out, but you can trace everything back to these kind of light operas.
Yes.
I think you can.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't know much about broader stuff, but that's a very interesting point. So we...
There's that and the ballad opera, which is a bit more British tradition, but that's a slightly different thing.
Okay.
They're all contemporaneous.
Right.
Thomas Arne and people like that.
Oh, Thomas Arne, yeah. So Dionysius and I set about workshopping it, and I'm a composer and arranger by trade, so I thought, adding my bits and bobs to it, I'd try and do a new arrangement of it. And I looked at the score and I thought, actually what might work really well is to have a kind of modern jazz band based ensemble. Because it's all written in figured bass, and actually that's a bass line and a chord instrument really, so a double bass and a guitar works almost just as well as the original. I didn't really have to do much to put it on those instruments and actually give it this sort of fresher contemporary sound.
And in a way, forgive me, I think that's the right decision. Well, it's absolutely the right decision because you come up trumps, but it's the right decision because actually putting it on as a period piece somehow disconnects it, or can disconnect it. You'd have to sort of almost be an expert in the period or have an interest in the period, whereas actually giving it a 21st century spin, English, resetting it in a context that people would understand, which is an office, business environment, and then just making sure that you're both true to the authenticity of the music as conceived, whilst at the same time performing it and augmenting it in a slightly more modern, contemporaneous way, is a really beautiful handle. It's very accessible. I found it very accessible, and there was a group in the audience, I thought, last night, which is when I saw it, who were enjoying it and appreciating it, and the comments afterwards were very positive as well. So.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yes, I heard a few of those. We've had some really nice audience feedback. It's a really interesting point you raise about how authenticity can kind of be a little bit of an illusion sometimes, because if you try and do everything exactly as it was performed, then you're doing it in the wrong context, maybe.
Yeah, you're setting it in aspect.
Yeah. And the piece often comes across as a kind of museum piece when it's done nowadays, which is quite rarely. And I thought if we could somehow bring it back to how a contemporary audience might have seen it, and the kind of
so it meant something, as it were, to a modern day audience.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah, as I say, it's the accessibility, in fact, isn't it?
Yeah. So we've tried to adapt the piece in a variety of ways. So I did my arrangement, as I mentioned, and I also wrote some new interlinking bits of music between the recitatives, which kind of tick off a load of different stylistic influences from the modern day. I did that mostly because I think faffing around with old recitatives is not so advisable when trying to get translations.
It can be tiresome too.
Yeah.
And a modern ear isn't that much. Doesn't seem so keen on it.
Yeah.
You just want dialogue or something to make it easy.
I think so.
Accessibility again, isn't
Accessibility.
it? That ability to connect with something.
I'm nothing without you. Serena, you're a part of me. You are a very heart of me, such a part of me, oh, the heart of me. Oh, poor defenseless creature, what will become of you? What will become of you? It is so gibberish to me, it is so gibberish to me, it is so gibberish to me. All these numbers, all these tables, Catalina, I just don't know. A coward, I have no bones,
Well, there we are. That was Daniel Dondi, the musical director of The Secretary turned CEO, and I hope you also enjoyed those taster extracts from the live recording. If you were listening to those lyrics in English, you can see they're hugely contemporary. References to Mars bars and national insurance, I think, tell you everything you need to know there. The show's very, very funny. Do get a chance to see it if you can. It's on until the 31st of August at the C venue in Chamber Street at 7:20 of an evening. I gave it 5 stars and called it an impeccably performed musical gem. And so it is. And if you're in the C venue in Chamber Street, you can also go along and see Xana Don't. It's a well-known off-Broadway cult musical almost. And I got the chance to speak to the very lovely Drew Gowland, the producer and director of this production. So let's have a quick extract from the conversation I had with him as we talk about love versus sex in a satire, and also how set design can really help get a message across. I should say this, part of that naivete, however, is that it is, it talks about love a lot, and it is about love, and it isn't actually about sex or carnality. And you can say that's the naive level of it, but in a way, do you consider, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that, but that kind of almost neutered nature makes it easier to swallow in order to make the story palatable? Is it an accessibility thing, do you think?
Absolutely, I think so. I definitely think that's what the writers had in mind. It's very easy to watch. There are no boundaries that are pushed too far. And I'll be honest, when we were bringing it to the Fringe, I had a conversation with the creative team and I said, do we need to make this sexier for the Fringe? Yes. Do we need to? And I think we have. I think I got into trouble from one reviewer saying I had made it too sexual.
Sexual or sexy? Because actually there's a difference.
There is a difference. I think there's
One
a difference.
Nice chest does not make a swallow.
Well, I would agree with you.
My metaphors,
Lovely. I would agree with you. I think that no, it's definitely not about sex. And if it were, it would be harder to watch and harder. I think people would find it harder to enjoy, especially those who would usually take issue with that kind of material. And so I think they've avoided it on purpose. I have, of course, taken advantage of the moments where it can be a little bit naughty, a little bit raunchier than it maybe needs to be.
Well, the wand is a great thing there, but it's very much, the wand could be, in some people's minds, interpreted.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You're an innocent man, and you go straight back to the monastery when we've finished, I know. But that's actually, I think that's intrinsically in the text anyway, or at least it's allowable. And also, you as director have brought that out in a way that can only be described in British pantomime terms. It's a little piece of double entendre for you to pick up if you want it.
And absolutely, it's hidden quite well. But if you see it, you see it, and you'll either enjoy it or you won't. And you can you can absolutely feel completely at ease with ignoring it if you've noticed it. But I think that it's high school children, it's high school kids. And I think you need to bear that in mind when you're directing it and when you're performing it. It doesn't need to be sexy.
No, it doesn't.
But it is at times.
It's also charming, which just gilds the lily as well. I mean, that's the point. Can I talk about some of your directorial choices, which I think are fantastic? I mean, just even simple things like the fact in Xana's original world, everything is brightly coloured. You even have sort of rainbow chairs, bright colours. And then as we transform into the, shall we call speech marks real life, for want of a better phrase, the shorthand, it is a black and white world. And black and white, of course, isn't just a colour scheme. It actually suggests a way of thinking. That is, we're going to the straight and narrow, if you like. I like that. There's also, and this is really amazing, I think, and given the constraints and the fact you're having to borrow and share lighting with 400 other shows using the same venue 10 minutes after and 10 minutes before you. But there's a lovely spot on Xana when he sings his sort of Dickens number, I want to call it, his torch number.
I understand.
And that harshness also, first of all, highlights him, but it's a harsh light, a harsh white light in a dark black box, really, theatre, which actually shows the world into which he's about to land or has landed. There's a lot of really nice little directorial choices which I think are sweet, subtle and just delicious.
Well, thank you very much. They're probably the most expensive choices I've ever made on Fringe. Yeah, well, we brought everything in ourselves. So I realised that part of the storytelling in this piece requires careful pinpointing of the audience's attention. In a black studio space, it's very difficult to do that. So
it does absorb, doesn't it, black?
Yeah, and it doesn't help as a director when you're directing theatre. You have to be mindful that you can't move your camera. You can't tell the audience where to. You can't point to them and say, please look over here now. And so I did bring in a lot of technical equipment to help me, and I hope it was subtle enough, but I do think it was super important that we could create those two worlds. When the spell has happened and we return to the world as we know it now, I needed, it was an absolute requirement that I could point that out to everybody.
A good delineation.
Thank you, I needed that. And so you can only do that in that kind of space with the clever use of light and of course the clever use of costuming. And I think you'll note there was no black or white in the first section.
No, not at all.
None. Nobody was allowed it. Absolutely not. All shoelaces were replaced. And so there was no white or black. And then, of course, you go into the world as we know it now, and it's black and white. And that's not to say disinteresting. It wasn't for me to say there's anything wrong with that. It was just trying to explain that if you are closed-minded, if you are not open-minded and able to see the world properly, you do miss all of the shades.
Yes.
And so the black and white was super important to me. Equally was the quick change back into colour to send you all back out.
Yes.
Of the
indeed, the walk down, as it were.
Yeah, the walk down, the panto walk down, as it were. I couldn't resist it. So
it does fit.
Well, thank you very much.
And it's not in any. I don't think it's in any way self-indulgent. I would fight that if anyone were to say it. I think it's absolutely essential.
Well, it's 100% essential.
And I think the audience need it as well.
Yeah, and they enjoy it. Yeah. I can see it from them. You have this moment of darkness in the prom, in the world that we view it as at the moment. You have this moment of darkness in this black and white, closed-minded, straight way of thinking, excuse the pun. Yeah. and then I thought it was extremely important that I sent them back out into the Fringe from the world that I would like them to go into. And so I did require my costume department and my cast to get changed extremely quickly in the wings for that. So I think they had about 25 seconds.
That's Drew Gowland, and I could have spoken to him for a very long time. If you want to go and see Xana Don't, please do. It's a 5-star show. You can until the 30th of August at the C venue in Chamber Street at 7:30 every evening. At the end of the day, it was a 5-star show and I called it hilarious and intoxicating. It completely won me over. Well, time for another song, of course. And this is no ordinary song. It's a song by a composer who composes film scores, but has also created a tremendously funny one-man musical which manages to merge the concept of film music with the songs from musicals. It's called Lawrence Owen, Cine Musical, and it's a free show in the Voodoo Rooms, but it's probably better if Lawrence himself tells you what the show's all about. So let's first hear a song from it, and then we'll hear a little bit of the conversation I had with Lawrence, who's a tremendously funny and intelligent man, about his wonderful show, Cine Musical.
An adventure in music alone. Sounds acoustical, we'll be guiding our way as we venture into the unknown. Cine Musical, though the venue's for over 18s. This is suitable for the family as well, so let's call it a PG-13. Just my pre-recorded soundtrack and a microphone. And cause I can't afford to pay more actors, I'm doing it all on my own. Cine Musical, it's like watching a film with your ears. Not so beautiful, but I hope nonetheless we can picture amazing frontiers. There may be thoughtful bits disguised as trivial shit, and at the heart of it, a part of it sincere. Our love of cinema, thrills and movie stars, and swooning orchestras are all because real life is pretty lame. So escape with me today. Sound is a powerful guide for the things that we feel inside. With just some orchestration and your imagination, you'll make the pictures in your mind. Cine Musical, listen well to the tidings I bring. Unusual will be drifting your way in a storm cloud of trumpets and strings. Cine Musical is a really hard word to make rhyme. Roman numerals are a really hard way to remember the date and the time. Now the credit sequence ends and the adventure starts. There'll be grunting and panting and substandard acting and maybe a minor award.
My name is Lawrence Owen, and my show is called Lawrence Owen Cinemusical, and I wrote and perform the show. That's about as succinct as I can put it, really, I think.
You put your finger right on the button there, if I may say. But the show itself is actually a fantastic show. It's it's musical, it's funny, it's beautifully acted. Bearing in mind it's a one-man show, that's a bit of a compliment to you, I think.
Thank you.
Indeed, all of that is beautifully focused together to make a truly satisfying hour.
Oh, that's very nice to hear.
But I think it would be worthwhile just briefly explaining the conceit of your show for people who are foolish enough not yet to have seen it.
Well, my show it's a musical comedy hour, but it's essentially an adventure story, like an adventure film in the kind of sort of 1980s Indiana Jones sort of mould of classic adventure films, but all told using an original score. And nothing else, and it sort of goes. It sort of lurches between different film genres. So it starts off with some Disney, and then it goes into westerns and James Bond films, and there's a sci-fi and etc. etc. etc.
There's lots of references if you want to find them, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean the joy of it, I think, is sort of crashing between all of these different film worlds. And so that was what was fun to write about it and to perform and hopefully to watch, is this sort of the weirdness of having all of these things sort of clash and come together, and the weird dynamics between characters that really shouldn't ever meeting, like a Disney princess and a Bond villain, and things like that.
There's also a very strong sense of the Wizard of Oz, in fact, as well.
Yes.
Because there's a semi-sort, which is, in a way, the first road movie, isn't it? Really?
It is. I describe it at the start of the show as being like a quest film. But in a way it is sort of like a road movie. And yes, it is. The plot is basically The Wizard of Oz. You've got 4 main characters who want some sort of change in life, going on a quest to find somebody who might be able to help them, essentially, is the plot format. But all of their problems arise from the limitations of their own genres. Yeah. So without giving too much away, the Disney character feels there's really only 3 paths that women can take in the Disney world. The cowboy character is sort of not content to be just a lone wandering gunman. He wants to have an active social life, etc., etc. So the genres themselves dictate the problems of the characters, which was that was a fun thing to try and find the tropes and the cliches of each of these things, to try and find what might be wrong with each of these people.
Yes, it's all stereotypes, isn't it?
Yeah,
and truisms as well.
Yeah.
And therefore immediately accessible, because obviously we've all seen enough films, even if we're not great film fans. Everyone will have seen enough of the kind of films you're taking a stick to, shall we say, a pointed stick, to know what we're getting in a way, and
hopefully recognise the tropes,
the shorthand of the characters. Now, let's talk about the construction of the piece, because and this I think is one of the things that makes this really stand out as a remarkable piece, actually, in many ways. Because, forgive me, in real life, one of your many talents is that you actually are a film score composer.
Yes.
But you also, this is a musical and on stage. Now, you have found a rather splendid way of fusing the idea of the music, once again, which can fall into stereotype, or at least there's a certain feel and tone to a certain kind of genre, which you're very good at creating and replicating, and so in a way you've managed to make a pastiche score of films, which rings absolutely true, whilst at the same time being absolutely original.
Thank you.
But you've also managed to turn it into a musical, so it is that the fusion of what might be called incidental music from a film, then becoming a song, sometimes because you've set lyrics to it which fit and are nice and witty and clever, and fit the character, but and then sometimes a song appears specifically, although it is often the kind of song you would expect to see in that kind of film, without giving too much away. The wise character at the end sings a song that the moment we in the audience heard the banjo accompaniment, we knew we were at least getting some kind of Muppety overtone. I won't put it any further than that.
I'm glad you picked up on that. I can sense that in the room there's normally about 10% of the crowd that kind of go, oh, I see.
Yes.
Yeah, which is always nice. And I always sort of think, yeah, you're my people. You're the ones. But
it is that balance and the fusion between film music and show music.
Right.
I know that's a very blunt instrument I'm using there, but how difficult or easy was that for you to dance
Well-
over that cleft?
Well, I started off by really thinking what kind of films, what genres of films have songs in them already. So
Yeah.
that was my starting point. So I thought, yeah, okay, Disney is full of songs. They're all essentially musicals. James Bond films, they have very iconic theme tunes. Westerns often have a weird sort of almost like a Greek chorus of song narration. Like all of the old John Wayne films often have what's the guy's name? I can't remember the guy's name, but there's a particular singer who would always do this thing, and it was basically along the lines of, and now he's riding to Boot Hill to face the guy who's going to, and so I sort of I found films which already had songs in them, which made it easier to sort of fit a song into that context, and then sort of bled bits of sound of incidental music out either side of these things.
There we are, Lawrence Owen and his Cine musical. Go and see it at the Voodoo Room. It is amazingly a free show. Couldn't believe it. At 1:45 every day until the 30th of August, with the 24th being off. Another incredibly talented man. And his show is a 5-star show. I said it was an impeccably performed and hilarious musical gem. Only 2 more shows to talk about now, I think, and they were the 2 that were most in contention for the Musical Talk's Pick of the Fringe Award. Now, as you know, this is something we try to give every year to the best piece of new writing. So I saw some fantastic shows this year. Some were new writing, some were old writing. But these next 2 shows were the 2 best pieces of new writing, in my opinion. And it was a real toss-up between them. But in the end, there has to be a silver medalist and a gold medalist. And so that's what I'm going to do this year. I'm actually going to award the Musical Talk Pick of the Fringe silver medal and the Musical Talk Pick of the Fringe gold medal. The silver medal first. Who's it going to be? Well, let's hear immediately from Andy Burley, the director, and Oliver Wood, the composer of the silver medalist Pick of the Fringe for Musical Talk, Wonderland. And if ever there was a show with the word wonder more deservedly in the title, this is it.
So, our show is Wonderland, a new musical at Greenside Nicholson Square at 11:30. And my name is Andy Bewley. I am the director and the writer of the book.
And my name is Oliver Wood, and I've composed the music and pretend to act sometimes.
You undersell yourself. Now, this is a fantastic show. It's I, like a lot of people, went in not quite knowing what to expect. It is called Wonderland. You naturally expect a Lewis Carroll kind of sensibility. It clearly is based or reimagined Lewis Carroll kind of storylines, but it's so much more than that. Would you care to tell me, how would you describe Wonderland to anyone who was walking by, desperate to see a show?
Well, the way we've described it is wicked pre-called Wizard of Oz. And it was wonderful and very clever, and that's what I really enjoyed about that show. And so when we looked at the Through the Looking Glass series, we thought it'd be really interesting to try and make sense of all these characters and how they got there. So essentially our show is a prequel to the books, but as you've said, there are little bits of strands from the actual stories which we do drop in. But what we've tried to do is take the nonsensicality of Through the Looking Glass and try and give it a heart. I think that's the crux of it.
You've done something tremendously clever there, because you do weave all the strands into a wonderful story, and there's this external frameworking story, isn't there, as well? Or at least it's not framework, it's a parallel story, which is the Alice story. It's almost as though you've written Wonderland in Alice rather than Alice in Wonderland, in a strange way. So how did it come to be? You know, when did this first sort of hove into view?
Well, I started thinking about writing a musical as part of my degree course.
And where are you?
I was at University of York. I've just graduated. This was part of my 3rd year. So I started out with grand ideas of a 2-hour musical, Alice in Wonderland, spectacular, and then very quickly realised that was completely impractical, given that I left myself about a month to write the show.
Jolly good.
So that kind of went on the back boiler, and for my course I just submitted bare bones of a score. And then Andy came to me and suggested that we apply for an opportunity to take the show to the Fringe, which we did and were successful, and the rest of that's kind of been a product of that timescale and that 1 hour slot that we've had to fill.
So when was your bare bones finish? When can we say the first sort of iteration?
April.
Oh, this year.
It was
Jolly
April.
good. That is tight, isn't it?
There's a wonderful moment when basically I heard all the music, and the very first song I heard was the song called Little Bird, and there was no real story about it. But the only story that I could really get anything from the song was the fact that the Bella and Hazel, who eventually are the Red and White Queen, didn't get on. And I thought that was a very interesting sort of tension to build the story around. And so we set out with the intention of creating a story which basically Alice was an accessory character as opposed to the central. And what eventually came to be was that, as you say, we had these two parallel stories running next to each other. And then the really tricky aspect, dealing with all the parameters of a Fringe slot, was trying to fit them all into a 56.5-minute slot.
I wonder if you could be more precise.
I think it was 27 today, actually. But yeah, the story basically came from the fact that we wanted to do something different with the Alice in Wonderland stories, and then what came to be through the creation of all the backstories of the Mad Hatter and the White Rabbit and the Caterpillar and the Cheshire Cat was just we sort of started aligning them to sort of that classic. That storyline, like who's the baddie and who are the ones that get on, and why did the Mad Hatter go mad was the question that popped into my head, and that was the start of a really, really exciting creation of that particular plot line.
So it is a collaborative effort in terms of the book.
Very much so. I mean, Andy's headed up actually writing the script. I kind of came with my bare bones score. I submitted a very loose plot line, which kind of was a kind of starting point for the stuff that we've kind of ended up with now. But Andy's
a prequel to the prequel.
A prequel to the prequel to the prequel.
It was very, very obvious when I heard Ollie's music that I'd be a fool to try and ask him to rewrite things, because the music he had at the time was really, really quite beautiful, and so I just sort of used that as a starting point as well. As he's written this song called Little Bird, and it's about Bella and Hazel, who are eventually the Red and White Queen, and they're fighting about something. And there was also Wonderland, which was Alice singing about Wonderland in a fairly retrospective and as if she'd written it herself. So you sort of take those two and you place them along in a storyline, and you sort of fill in the gaps.
So you're building nexus points, aren't you?
Yeah,
very much so.
And it was a very, very, very tricky process because with the books there is so much you can do, and it's very, very hard to cut certain characters, and it's very, very hard to try and make the characters new whilst also having a bit of Carol in them. I think we've done okay.
There we are, Andy Burley and Oliver Wood there, two lovely people, two very talented people who were able to create a wonderful show called Wonderland. It's on until the 22nd of August, and you can see it at the Greenside venue in Nicholson Square at 11:30am in the morning. A fantastic 5-star show. I described it as subtle and exuberant and intelligent by turns, a complete treat. And the winner of the Musical Talk Pick of the Fringe Silver Medal. And so the winner of the Musical Talk Pick of the Fringe Gold Medal, which is to say the Pick of the Fringe for Musical Talk 2015, is a show with, well, a slightly provocative title, and so I'm going to have to apologise for swearing, because it's called Get Your Shit Together, which is a colloquial term, as I'm sure you're aware, meaning get your act together. I spoke to Elliot Salt, who was one of the writers of the show, about this fantastic piece of new writing here at the 2015 Fringe.
My name is Elliot Salt, and the show is called Get Your Shit Together, and I am the co-writer of the book, the lyricist, and one of the cast members.
Now, Get Your Shit Together, I'm going to say, has got what might be seen as a slightly provocative title just because of the S word, although you can swear on Musical Talk, but actually is a very, I think, real, touching in many ways story, really about familial relationships first and romantic relationships second, although it is a failed romantic relationship which triggers the whole thing off.
Yeah.
So would you care to briefly describe what the show is, without revealing the ending in any way?
Obviously, yeah. Well, it's essentially a show about a guy called Alex whose girlfriend leaves him for a breakfast TV presenter called Breakfast Dave.
And who hasn't had that experience?
And I mean, we've all been there.
Yeah.
And he loses his job due to an incident related to that. and has to move into a horrible apartment behind a pub where a band called Ernest and the Keen Beans are rehearsing for their gig incessantly, and his sisters come and try and cheer him up and help him move on, which doesn't go down quite as well as they'd hoped.
Yes, because they are very different personalities, the sisters, as well, aren't
Yes.
they? And there's a certain antagonism, as you would expect between siblings, between
Yeah.
the three of them, but also between each of the combinations of the two of them. So,
Yeah.
yes, no, it explores that family side very well, and actually that's something you don't see that much in musical theatre, at least.
Mm.
So, let's start at the very beginning. How did Get Your Shit Together get together? How did it start?
Okay, well, our company, Deadpan Theatre, started a couple of years ago when I met my co-writer, Missy, doing another play where we were bored in a tech rehearsal and started writing a first scene as a joke for this other play, Low Tide in Glass Bay, that was on last year, which we starred in, and that was again about family relationships, so it's something that we write about quite a lot.
Thematic.
Yeah, so that ended up going to Edinburgh, and we did another play this year called Changing Partners, which was on at Brighton Fringe. And then we went to see a play in Edinburgh last year, which was on at Big Belly, and loved the space, and we're both big musical fans, so we were like, it'd be great to do a musical in here. It's sort of the right size, it's not too many seats, and it's, for those of you who haven't been, it's sort of a...
Vaulted chamber, would you say?
Yes, I think that's probably the best way
Or
to
a
describe
cave.
it. Yeah, a cave, which is
It's
written
either a
in...
vaulted chamber or a chamber as vault. It's
Yeah, I feel like it's that rare combination
Yes.
of both, and the sort of damp dripping, and
yes.
in our sound check, the microphone went off too loud by accident, and a bit of the ceiling fell down.
How very much like the curious incident of the dog in the night.
So we went to see that, and that's sort of where the idea of the horrible apartment and the dodgy
Yeah.
pub came from, and the play sort of came out of the set. And interesting you should say about the family relationships is that we knew we wanted to write another play involving that. And I love we kind of like writing rom-com sort of thing, so it all came out of that, really.
Now, I think we should talk about your sort of pedigree in this, because, 2 years ago you were one of the stars of a pick of the Fringe for Musical Talk called Take It Interns.
I was indeed, yeah.
By Ronan Shields and many others, and what an excellent show that was. And it really was an excellent show.
It was so much fun to do.
And it was so much fun to watch. I mean, it was a cracking show. And of course, you were a part of the cast of that, and as a group, you were all with the University at Bristol, studying music and drama and things like that, I think. So there's clearly something in the water in Bristol. But here we are 2 years later. Can I ask what it is you're reading or have been reading at university? And, there's a world of difference between the theory of learning theatre, shall we say, and then doing it.
Yeah, well, I read English. I've just graduated. So not explicitly linked, but actually very useful,
Good for
obviously,
book
in terms
writing,
of...
though.
Yeah, book writing and sort of interpretation and writer's intent, I suppose, which is very deep for a light-hearted late-night musical, but who knows, it may have helped. So yeah, that's what I've been reading.
And you have found that useful in a practical sense. Well, clearly you have, because it's a very successful show. But
yeah, I'd say I found it. Yeah, I found studying English oddly more useful in acting than writing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I think it makes me read into lines slightly more than I would anyway. But it's good to have that kind of practice at very quick interpretation. So it means that sort of on sight reading or first rehearsal,
You've already got a thumbnail sketch.
Yeah,
of who
I think it probably helps to know that. But obviously, with this one, I'd hope I kind of had a vague idea of the writer's intention in the first rehearsal, given that I'd written it.
Well, there we are. Elliot Salt talking about Get Your Shit Together. Go and see it if you can. It's on at the Underbelly in Cowgate at 11:35 p.m, which is very late in the evening, and it runs until the 30th of August. Well worth catching if you can. Now, as I've said over and over again, every show I've mentioned today is still available to see. So I implore you, if you wish to have the time of your life enjoying musical theatre in one of the greatest cities in the country, then please do. The Edinburgh Festival Fringe never fails to amuse, entertain. It certainly inspires me every year. I hope you've enjoyed hearing just some of the short extracts of much longer conversations which we'll be broadcasting in the next few weeks. And also some of those fantastic songs. There are many other shows where I've conducted interviews which have already closed, and you've missed them, I'm afraid. But you'll be hearing those in the next few weeks as well. And of course there are many shows I couldn't get to, which may be equally good as the ones we've spoken about. Undoubtedly some of them will be. Go and explore for yourself. The Edinburgh Festival Fringe is such a wide cultural arts festival that you can weave any path through it and have a wonderful time. All I'm doing is sharing mine. I hope you've enjoyed some of it. Tune in again next week and for the next few weeks, and we'll be hearing all about the Edinburgh Festival Fringe 2015, and particularly the musical theatre and cabaret shows that I've been able to see there. It's the best week of my year, every year, but then I do have to have a very long lie down afterwards, so I'm off to do that now. But I can't do that without bidding you farewell, that would be very rude. So with the sounds of the street in Edinburgh, the Royal Mile behind us, let me say goodbye for now. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Thos Ribbets. Copyright Musical Talk 2015, except for the songs where the copyright in each case remains with the creators. And my huge thanks to each and every one of them for agreeing to let me play one or more of their marvellous songs.
Okay.
One of the great things that happens when you sit here, even when you're clearly in an interviewing situation, people will come up and say, "Can I interest you in a show later on?" I'll cut that bit out.